Hello, I'm at Reardon, and thanks for watching this Wednesday evening, July 26th, West Weather Update brought to you by Nutrient Ag Solutions. To start here, we're just looking at a satellite loop of what's really the monsoon season, kind of kicking into gear slowly here over parts of the desert Southwest, the interior west of the United States. We talked about earlier how El Nino would likely delay or even just kind of weaken the whole monsoon season in the Southwest. We've seen some of that. It's been kind of a slow start. We've seen a pickup lately in it. It feels like we're now getting into what looks more like monsoonal activity. If you just look at the loop here, you finally have thunderstorms moving into parts of, say, Nevada, Utah, northern Arizona at these higher elevations. The reason for that is we've had finally some heat built into the area. We were certainly talking about heat waves last week, still seeing some hot temperatures today. In fact, parts of southwestern Arizona still under what feels like this endless excessive heat warning. So high temperatures still there today. That has allowed that monsoon season to get going a little bit. Now there's going to be some changes, I think, to that in the forecast. We will talk about that, but certainly today still seeing hot temperatures here in central southern Arizona, far east southeastern California. If we jump over and look at the all hazards map, these are all the advisories valid for NOAA, or from NOAA I should say, here on Wednesday evening. We still see those excessive heat warnings, Southern California, parts of southwestern Arizona, heat advisories kind of peppered in there as well. So high temperatures there. We just jump over and look at the current temperature readings out of southwestern Arizona and some of the desert southwest here. We're talking very hot temperatures. Death Valley included in that, Yuma, Arizona, over into Imperial County of California, up the Colorado River Valley toward Lake Mead, included in some of those excessive heat warnings even up there, and then into parts of south central Arizona, getting even further east than that. Now the change from the conversation last week is areas to the north or west of this haven't seen the same amount of heat. So the Central Valley of California now into the low 90s, and maybe the North Valley, if you get closer to the San Joaquin Valley, just talking, maybe pushing up near 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's not crazy hot for them this time of year. That's a bit closer to normal, if anything. The Snake River Valley looking at 90-degree Fahrenheit temperatures there, eastern Washington in the low 80s. So not a widespread heat wave we're dealing with here today. As of Wednesday evening, we've seen some relief in the north. We talked about some of that last week. Other big weather items we were talking about just a week ago today, the potential for some sort of tropical storm spinning up in the eastern Pacific. It wasn't that long ago we were talking about tropical storm, then Hurricane Calvin impacting Hawaii. We thought potentially there was an area of development kind of highlighted by the National Hurricane Center here in the eastern Pacific of a potentially the next tropical storm Dora developing, which could kind of take a similar track that Calvin did. We didn't see that really materialized. It quickly developed into a tropical depression after the video, and a weekend after that, we didn't see that kind of organized convection get going. That spinning into a tropical storm never really occurred. That has been kind of wiped from the slate here, if you will, and not a lot to talk about. Just kind of visually, if you look across the eastern Pacific, this area here, where we're looking for tropical storm development, not much going on. I think that is probably continuing into the forecast a bit, at least out over the next 7 days. There could be some changes after that. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the video. As far as the National Hurricane Center is concerned, they're just identifying a kind of remote possibility of development here off the southern coast of Mexico. And this particular kind of potential or area is really pretty far out in the forecast, I think getting into even early next week. So you're not going to even see it, the area of concern yet on this satellite imagery here. This area here, you can see very few thunderstorms, if anything, in that pocket here. In fact, the area they're watching is potentially some thunderstorms roaming out of Central America, coming into the eastern Pacific later into next week, but not high probabilities on that area of disturbance right now. When we kind of go back and look at the heat wave that we've been talking about in Arizona, I wanted to kind of visualize what I think has been responsible, not only for kind of the jump start of finally the monsoon season getting going, but also the heat wave that we've been talking about in the Central Valley of California, even expanding beyond that into parts of Washington, Idaho, seeing warmer temperatures. Certainly the desert Southwest, we've talked about numerous high temperature records falling there, just daily records, but also warm overnight temperatures, and then just hitting these kind of extreme daily highs over and over and over again. They've really racked up the kind of heat data or statistics this year, certainly. And I kind of came back to this map or this composite here. This is looking at jet stream level winds over the last 25 days or so, really since the start of July 1st. And in a typical El Nino year, we typically see that subtropical jet stream we've been talking about supercharged, kind of right out of the Central Pacific. So I kind of usually say you can draw a line from maybe Hilo, Hawaii down here up into Southern California. And what the colors here are showing us is that, if anything, the jet stream has been weaker in this area here in July. It's been running to the north of that, up and over this area where we typically expect that trajectory. And that has allowed an upper level ridge to build into the desert southwest, something that looks a little bit like that. And that has been the focus of that heat. That heat has kind of, on the other side of it, allowed the monsoon to get going here in the last just week or two. But it's really this kind of northward shift in the jet stream that brought the heat in and started that monsoon. And I'm showing this because I think we're going to finally see a change in this, and I think it has to do with El Nino. So this is the current jet stream here. This is a forecast. I'll make it valid essentially as of right now here, Wednesday evening. And I'll draw that line. Again, we're talking about Hawaii into Southern California, and not much to speak of in here in terms of the jet stream. I mean, if anything, it's kind of weak, discombobulated, flowing north over the Pacific Northwest. But as I take that forecast out, this is looking through Friday into Saturday, we still see kind of a similar pattern with what we've been dealing with. This upper level ridge here situated over Arizona and New Mexico, maybe what we've called the Four Corners Ridge, that's still trying to bring heat into this area here through Friday and Saturday. But look toward Hawaii, just even over the next 72 hours. I'll take this quickly back here, valid Wednesday evening. You'll notice an ever so slight strengthening of that jet stream over Hawaii. In fact, if I take this into Saturday and Sunday, now we have something of a more extended subtropical jet stream coming across not only Hilo, but the whole island or state of Hawaii here. And as I take this into Tuesday now of next week, this is where we're crossing into now August 1st, and now into Wednesday and Thursday finally, okay, we have a more bona fide subtropical jet stream screaming out of Hawaii coming in towards Southern California. So just over the next week, we're kind of seeing a resurgence of maybe a more typical El Nino pattern, if this forecast is to be believed. And I think it is, and I think this is going to have some impacts on the forecast going forward, certainly as we start August here. Now, two things I want to show you quickly is to kind of reinforce what I'm seeing here. One, this kind of color palette you're seeing here, we're looking at the Central Pacific, kind of right along the equator in the Pacific Ocean, kind of the tropical Pacific. It's this area down here that we're highlighting. Now, this black line here is the current day. We can see the dates over here on the left. We call this a Hobmuller diagram. It gives us an idea of what was going on in the past as we kind of go up in the graph, and what that forecast tells us going out in the future for the Central Pacific Ocean, specifically. Saying specific Pacific is hard very quickly. But if I look in this area over the last 2 to 3, maybe 4 weeks, just kind of in this area, what I don't see a lot of is kind of this warm colors, the oranges, the reds, even the yellows. What we typically expect in an El Nino year are those warmer colors, because at least on this graph, that tells us a weaker trade wind profile over the Central Pacific. Weaker trade winds are kind of a hallmark of El Nino. It allows those warmer temperatures to build into those sea surfaces in the Pacific Ocean. That's really El Nino. And as a result of that kind of lack of weakness, if you will, over the last 3 to 4 weeks, we haven't seen El Nino strengthen as quickly as we thought it did. The forecast earlier this summer were that El Nino was going to strengthen quickly and through July and August. We'd be talking potentially about a strong to very strong El Nino getting into fall. And we haven't quite seen that same level of strengthening. We did enter an El Nino. It's still kind of slowly getting its act together, just not nearly as fast as we thought. But look at the forecast here. If you look closely, here's right the present day here, July 26th. As we go out into the forecast, maybe sometime around August 1st, we start to see that weakness, those warmer colors build in the Central Pacific. I think what we're really seeing here getting into that August forecast, seeing that subtropical jet stream kind of reignite over Hawaii, is El Nino kind of turning back on again, saying, oh, I'm still here and I'm ready to strengthen again. Just a little bit more delayed than we thought, and I think that's going to change the forecast a bit as we get into August. Another way we can look at this is looking at something here. It's the same Hobmuller diagram, looking at the same kind of focusing on the same area of the globe here, but it's really showing us where this kind of wide-scale rising motion is in the atmosphere. And we really look for kind of rising motion as an area of focus for thunderstorms and convection. Where air goes up in the atmosphere very quickly, interesting things tend to occur. And if we look over the Central Pacific going forward in time in this forecast, we see kind of this kind of slanted signature of rising motion moving from the West Pacific through the Central Pacific, kind of over Hawaii, and then into the East Pacific. And it's in this area here that we're expecting kind of a re-strengthening of that Pacific or subtropical jet stream as this kind of convection makes its way from the western tropical Pacific through the central tropical Pacific into the eastern tropical Pacific. That's going to strengthen that jet stream from Hawaii all the way to California, like we talked about just a few slides ago. So I think we're seeing reinforcement here in the forecast of what really might be kind of a weak MJO signal, typically not very strong when we're talking July or August as far as the Madden-Julian oscillation is concerned. But kind of a reigniting El Nino, we might be seeing something of the MJO trying to turn back on, and it's changing the jet stream quickly over Hawaii and then finally over California and the western U.S. So we have to talk about it as we get into the forecast. Now, in the meantime, just talking temperatures over the next 5 to 6 days, I talked about how kind of early on in the forecast, kind of getting into Thursday, Friday, Saturday, we were still seeing that kind of four corners or southwest ridge linger. And as a result of that, we're seeing the high temperatures linger. So taking the high temperature forecast into Thursday, still seeing hot temperatures in the desert southwest, not a big change from today, perhaps. Looking over to the Central Valley, not seeing those extreme high temperatures, that relief kind of continuing for areas west and to the north of that subtropical ridge there. So take this into Friday and Saturday, finally bringing the temperatures back down a bit in the desert southwest. And as they get into Monday and Tuesday, that's kind of that critical period when we saw that subtropical jet stream really trying to strengthen and make its way from Hawaii over to California. And that's bringing temperatures down now over parts of the desert southwest. Now we're talking about highs in just above triple digits rather than into the triple digit teens or even beyond that. So seeing a kind of a finally some relief for the desert southwest, I think as a result of that jet stream pattern. The temperature effects might be more pronounced even after that. We'll get into the long range forecast just a bit. Another thing I wanted to talk about certainly is the precipitation implications here. This is looking at a 96-hour or 4-day sliding window from the ECMWF of forecasted precipitation. So really looking at the next 4 days here ending maybe early Sunday morning. And what we see here is kind of a continuation of that monsoon, which just kind of recently got reignited. So we see kind of these high elevation thunderstorms, perhaps some of these trying to percolate into the lower river valleys. If you look at storm chances, maybe in some of these river valleys, I'm talking Yuma, Arizona, Blythe areas further to the north, maybe looking at anywhere from like 10 to 30% chances of storms. These are cities that if they're going to get rain, can occur here in this monsoon season, but we're only talking small amounts here typically, so not a huge chance of these thunderstorms kind of meandering into those areas. But if it's going to happen, potentially here in July, it would happen, I think, over the next 4 days here. As I take this forecast into the future, this is looking out into Monday and Tuesday, we see that kind of continuation of the monsoon here again. Kind of the next 4 days are when we're expecting that subtropical ridge to remain here over parts of the desert southwest. But remember, as that subtropical jet stream pushes into the area, that's more typical of El Nino, and we know that El Nino tends to weaken the monsoon. So we saw that occurring kind of just at the turn of the month, August 1st, August 2nd, getting into August 3rd. As I take this 4-day rolling window of precipitation out into that same time period, now looking at August 4th, August 5th, that subtropical jet coming out of Hawaii into Southern California like this, helping to disrupt the southwest monsoon circulation. It's pushing a lot of that precipitation in that focused area further toward the north into the interior west. So now we're talking about areas like Wyoming, Utah, perhaps still eastern Nevada, northern Arizona, and getting into Idaho. Still seeing kind of some signatures that precipitation chances are going to increase into parts of the Snake River Valley. Certainly the elevations there getting further into the upper Snake River Basin here in eastern Idaho. So seeing precipitation chances increase into the end of next work week as a result of that subtropical jet stream pushing into the area. Kind of corollary here is that the desert southwest monsoon in the heat walking back a bit further toward the south. If we look at temperatures over that same time period, make this valid here. This is also looking at kind of a rolling window here. So we're looking at a 5-day window of temperature anomalies here from the ECMWF ensemble. If we start this just looking out into next Monday, kind of early Monday morning, so now till then, I mentioned that subtropical ridge still kind of centered over Arizona and parts of New Mexico. So heat lingering here through the weekend, starting to come and cool down here at the end of the weekend, getting into next week. Still see that relief here lingering in the Pacific Northwest, parts of Idaho, Northern California. As that subtropical jet stream moves in, though, kind of along those areas where it's coming onshore, we're expecting temperatures to come down a bit here in parts of California, even parts east of the Sierra Nevada, into parts of Nevada, seeing more seasonal temperatures. And then this is kind of looking all the way out into the end of next week, Wednesday of next week through the next weekend. We still see some warmer temperatures perhaps in the desert southwest, but nothing, as extreme as we were just going through. So I doubt we'll see kind of a reissuance of some of these extreme heat or excessive heat warnings that we've seen of late. So that subtropical jet stream kind of coming up like this, focusing precipitation into this area and keeping some of these areas a little bit cooler than they might otherwise be. You also have to imagine if that subtropical jet stream is careening into the area, it's going to reduce the chance of these big ridges kind of lingering over the southwest for a number of days. There's just too much momentum in the atmosphere with the potential to kick some of those out. So still seeing some warm temperature chances here in maybe Arizona and New Mexico, but perhaps not the prolonged heat wave risk we were dealing with in July as a result of that jet stream coming into the area. Now, the jet stream that's moving in, that's just the subtropical component of it. We do have a polar component that's well to the north in Canada, and as a result, underneath that, we still see some polar ridging, and that's bringing hot temperatures into parts of British Columbia, Alberta, and then in proxy to that, parts of Washington. We're still seeing some higher temperature chances despite being north of that subtropical jet stream we were just talking about. We kind of sum this all up looking out into next work week, looking at the Climate Prediction Center, their forecast for 6 to 10 day temperatures. You can actually see where that subtropical jet stream is coming on shore if you just look at their temperature chances here. So that's kind of coming on shore here in Southern California, pushing into this area here. That's where we're expecting seasonal, if not even cooler than average temperatures along coastal California into the Central Valley. Less heat wave risk going through the work week next week. Did mention the chance for some warmer temperatures in parts of Arizona or New Mexico, but not the extreme warm temperatures values, anything like this here we're seeing in Louisiana. So those have shifted to the east as a result of that subtropical jet stream getting reignited, pushing into the area. And then if you look at precipitation, the graphic on the right here, 6 to 10 days, looking at August 1st through 5th, you'd imagine at kind of the nose or the terminus of that subtropical jet stream as it comes on shore here, that's where we're expecting a focus for precipitation. Climate Prediction Center a bit more bullish on precip chances all the way through the state of Idaho. If you remember, we were looking at the ECMWF forecast earlier. It was a little bit shifted more toward the east, but the Climate Prediction Center a bit wider swath here of above average precip, even all the way into maybe even parts of eastern Washington and Oregon. Depending on how far this precip shifts to the northwest, I think is important because this is an area, maybe not the Snake River Valley, but the Pacific Northwest areas more toward that northwestern region that have been seeing drought build into the area. Now, getting past that, as we get maybe into the second week of August, there's been some kind of mixed signals in the forecast. It's not uncommon when we're talking, 10 days plus in the forecast. Take a peek at the Climate Prediction Center. There is this kind of what I'll call a heat risk here in the Pacific Northwest extending beyond that. I think part of that are a conversation about sea surface temperatures we'll have in just a few slides here. But also I talked about that polar jet stream shifted well off into Canada. That's allowing some heat to build in underneath that, despite maybe the subtropical jet stream still coming through here in California, Nevada, parts of Utah. Seeing a continued higher precipitation chance here across the interior west. As a result, again, what we're thinking is going to be a continuation of that subtropical jet stream pattern here, perhaps shifting just a bit north. And then I started this video talking about the monsoon, El Nino years. We typically see a weakened monsoon. Because of the kind of pause in El Nino over the last 3 weeks, we saw that monsoon finally get going. Some of these upper elevations, I think that activity going into August is kind of going to be put on hold a little bit as the subtropical jet stream comes back into the conversation and starts to deteriorate that circulation there. Want to touch quickly on the drought monitor as we kind of wrap up here. This was released valid as of last Thursday. The next update will come out tomorrow morning here. Again, the area of concern here is looking into the parts of the Pacific Northwest. Idaho, we saw those higher precipitation chances moving in the next 6 to 10 days, potentially 8 to 14 days. This area is not included in the Pacific Northwest drought that we're talking about right now. But if some of this precipitation can get further toward the northwest, maybe even into eastern Washington, I don't think that would be a bad thing, considering there's kind of this background wildfire, drought, and heat risk as we go into late summer and early fall there as a result of some of these El Nino signals that we've been keeping an eye on. If we kind of look at the seasonal drought outlook from the Climate Prediction Center, kind of in concert with the drought monitor we just looked at, we are expecting drought to persist here in the Pacific Northwest. That's that brown color where we currently have drought, expecting a continuation of that. And then that yellow color, unfortunately, is where seasonal drought development is likely. We've been talking about kind of a background lack of precip signal here in late summer, getting into fall here in the Pacific Northwest as a result of El Nino. So that remains a concern. Getting rainfall in here would be good given kind of that background state we're entering into. And then if you look parts of the desert Southwest, that monsoon, as a result of El Nino kicking back into gear here, the seasonal outlook is for drought development, potentially along parts of the upper reaches of the Colorado River Valley and further toward the south in parts of Arizona and New Mexico as a result of that. So kind of sum things up here. We saw a pause in El Nino in July, certainly. So looking at the El Nino index, how we keep track of those water temperatures in the central Pacific. We saw the increase up into El Nino status in May and June. We've really kind of seen this plateau since then. I think we're going to see another strengthening here going into August, and kind of with that, more typical El Nino weather in parts of the western U.S. One other thing I'm keeping an eye on, certainly El Nino developing here in the central Pacific, those warm water temperatures shifting toward the west. That is starting to erode this negative PMM, or this kind of California-Mexican cold patch that we've been keeping an eye on. Not nearly as strong as it was just even a month ago. So this will continue to erode, we think, or at least have less of an influence on the pattern. But an area to the north of that, this is some warm temperature in the ocean that has moved in just in the last few weeks here. I think we touched on it in the last video. Reminiscent in some ways of the blob that we saw in California back in 2015, going into the El Nino there. I wouldn't say it's the exact same thing. It looks a little bit different. We didn't have this kind of cold patch of ocean temperatures here off the southwest coast of California. Nonetheless, it is reminiscent of that. I think in the meantime, just kind of the immediate forecast, it increases the risk for some of these ridges to build into the Pacific Northwest, parts of Alberta, Washington, the Pacific Northwest. There's, again, kind of this increased concern for the wildfire season coming up here that's getting underway. Continued heat waves potentially up there. In fact, if I just jump back and look at some of these kind of long-term temperature outlooks, we see higher than average chances for warmer temperatures there, even getting out into the week 3 to 4 outlook here in the Pacific Northwest. So that concern's there. That kind of increased sea surface temperature is kind of co-located with that, so that's a concern going forward into August and September here. One other thing I'll mention, kind of usually end on the tropics. I started with that here today. I'll take you back to that velocity potential map I showed you. This is an area here where the green colors are where we're expecting rising motion. As these kind of in that first week of August, getting out from August 5th to 10th, push into the eastern tropical Pacific, I'm expecting kind of a resurgence of our eastern Pacific hurricane season. Just recently here, that's quieted down. We saw what was potentially Dora fail to materialize in the eastern Pacific. Got to go all the way back to Calvin developing now a week or two ago as our last storm system, kind of waiting on Dora, and now Eugene here would be the next two. My guess is as we get into August 5th and go out to August 10th, there'll be more to talk about as a result of that. This kind of surge or quasi-MJO signal coming out of the Pacific. So that's where I'll leave things here as of this evening. This final graphic I pulled up here, this is just comparing the 2015 ocean temperatures from October. That year we had a developing El Nino, a very strong one, in fact, in the Pacific. I've had some questions, I want to cover this right at the end. I had some questions this year again about that kind of warm blob moving in off the coast or the western coast of the U.S. It looks different here than some of the things we're dealing with. One, we had that cold patch that we just talked about. That's here in present day. We don't see that in that 2015 comparison. We do see these warm temperatures here in the Pacific Northwest, seeing those now, seeing the developing El Nino, but the differences here, I think will keep this year a little bit different. And then even if you look over into the western Pacific, if anything, we were kind of cold over here off the coast of Asia, whereas if we compare that to now, it's about the exact opposite of that here in 2023. So some important differences, I think, nonetheless. These ocean temperatures here do increase the temperature risks, high temperature risks here in the Pacific Northwest, and perhaps some drought risk there as well. But there are some other differences here. Going into an El Nino year, if we kind of keep this warmer patch around, it could help to deflect some systems, I think, up and over the western U.S., but really in El Nino years, we're talking more about a subtropical jet stream coming in, something looking more like this. I think if we develop a good El Nino, we'll still see that this winter and could capitalize on a more beneficial water year in parts of central Southern California and Arizona. The specifics are which, hard to get too confident here, kind of in late summer, but certainly something we'll be keeping an eye on here as we get into the water year here starting in October. All right, I think that's all I have for you all here this evening. Thank you for watching.